Hello and welcome to my brand new podcast. I'm Nicky Raby and I'm thrilled that you're joining us. I do lots of things. I'm an actor, coach, writer, speaker and a mum. And in my coaching work, I work with creatives, personal brands, freelancers and small businesses. In this podcast, I want to talk about success, but not in the traditional sense. I want to bring you conversations that discuss success, what it means, and how there are many different versions. We're going to be talking about business, branding, becoming visible, saying no, saying yes, and how you can create a thriving portfolio career doing more of what you love and less of what you don't. Sometimes there can be a certain mystery around the online world, so I'm going to be asking my guests how they started and grew, how they get paid, how they stand out, and how they create success on their terms. As always, please check the show notes for all things we mention and come and say hi over on social media at Nicky Raby or via my website nickyraby.com/podcast. In today's episode, I'm talking to Lena Langebek, who is a screenwriter working for TV and film. She's one of the co-founders of the campaign organisation Raising Films, and she's also the co-chair of WGGB's Film Committee. I accidentally say in this episode that she's an actor. She's really not. She's a screenwriter and somebody who I am very grateful is at the table. I've been an actor for 25 years and still continue to love to have that part of my portfolio career. But I do get worried sometimes. I will admit that sometimes the scripts aren't there or the stories that I want to creatively be part of are just not being written. So the fact that Lena is consciously putting brilliant content out there and using her creativity and making a stand for parents and for women who are not just 19, 20, 21, but who are grown women with life experience to share. Oh, it's just so wonderful and refreshing. I know that you're going to get loads from this episode. It's even if you're not an actor or you're not in the industry, but if you're a lover of TV and film, it will be a really interesting chat for you. As always, the conversation continues over on Instagram. You can follow me at Nicky Raby. And also I've opened up some coaching spots for the next couple of months and also some live events in London, and some of them will be online as well. So no matter where you're listening in the world, you can come and join. As always, I look forward to your thoughts. Here's the episode. Hello and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So let's just start by saying who you are and what you do.
So my name is Lena Langebek and I'm a screenwriter. I am also a lecturer, and then I am one of the co-founders of Raising Films, a campaign organisation that is trying to change the working conditions for parents and carers in the film and TV industry.
Fantastic. It's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, as we are both actors and are both negotiating this creative juggle, let's say. But firstly, let's go back. How did your career begin in terms of your own writing and creating?
I think it's always a funny thing to try and make sense of your life backwards. I think it's easier to kind of go, there were all the indicators to become a screenwriter when I was young, because I wrote poetry and blah, blah, blah. But, but I think, many people do that. And sometimes you can join the dots later on in life. But, as you're looking forwards when you're young, you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up. But I did, write a lot when I was younger, and I started with poetry and stories and so on. And then I think at some point, I'm not exactly sure why, but I became interested in film, and I went to something called the European Film College when I was 20, I think. And that probably really set me off on my path. I still went off traveling and I did, I had lots of detours.
But I'm sure you came back with lots of stories as well.
Yeah, I did. I'd always wanted to travel, so I went traveling in a way that had nothing really to do with a film career per se, but that was something I needed to do. So I started my training a bit later than others maybe, but I think it's all played a part.
Absolutely. And I think it's, only when you look in that sort of reflective way that you're like, oh, that was the fork in the road, or that was suddenly that group of people that I met that suddenly made me think differently about things.
Yeah. And, and sometimes you don't know that, you're going to end up in this specific corner, but you probably have an idea sort of where, you want to go at some point, but I've at various points I've wanted to be a journalist and an architect and lots of interest when I was young, and in a way maybe that's why I became a screenwriter, because you can pretend to be lots of different people or dive into lots of different people's lives.
Yes.
So
without leaving your house.
Exactly. There is a link. Yeah, exactly.
How is that process of writing for you? I know lots of people have creative dreams or creative ideas up their sleeve, but for some reason or another, they haven't brought it to life. How did you sort of get started in terms of carving out a career for yourself in this industry?
Well, the film college was a beginning, I would say, and from there on, I went. Apart from going traveling, I also went on to work on other people's films. I worked in production as a producer's assistant, as a first AD. And then what else did I do? I started to write scripts, I guess. And then I trained as a screenwriter. So I came to the UK and trained as a screenwriter in Bournemouth. And then from there on, I got my first commission. And then you just sort of you carry on. Where the stories come from, I don't know. I'm quite inspired by real life. So, things you read in the paper, but where it then goes from there can go in all kinds of different directions, to something that becomes, less of a realist drama perhaps, but I'm quite inspired by real events and people, I guess, in the things that I write about.
And how has that changed since becoming a mother? Because I think often when you transition into that new chapter, everything is on a different sort of schedule, as in you're looking after another person and you have to feed them at certain times, or they require different things from you. So I think that sort of writer's dream of, when the inspiration hits, it will all sort of come together. How have you changed that creative process for yourself, or has it changed indeed?
Well, it had to change. I think I was probably blissfully naive when I was pregnant and up on, and even before I got pregnant, but up until, and maybe even up until after a year after I'd had my daughter, I had this naive belief that I could do everything that I'd done before in exactly the same way. Until it suddenly hits you that there is no longer 24 hours in the day.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's frustrating, and sometimes it's good, because now I have had to become more focused. I think there is sometimes a tendency in the creative process where you tell yourself that it's absolutely necessary to faff for 6 hours of your working day. And suddenly now you don't necessarily have 8 hours.
Yes.
And so you have to be focused and more strategic about what you can do when. And if you only have 2 hours, then you have to think about what can I do in those 2 hours, and not waste those hours. I think, before I might have thought, well, there's no way I can rewrite that entire sequence if I only have half an hour, so I might as well do nothing. Whereas now I'm like, okay, well, I can't do that, but I can do something else in that half hour, so that every half hour counts. But and that's an ongoing process, I think. But also sometimes negotiating time to go away, which I do, and I have a partner that that makes that possible, basically.
Yes.
So that if I have a big deadline, that I go away for 3 days or something like that, and that is also necessary, because it is something else to be able to dive into the creative process completely and not think about making breakfast and getting somebody to nursery.
Yes.
And it's hard to, well, you know exactly what that is, but when you think of it, it doesn't matter because I can just get back and kind of dive into it. But sometimes staying in your project, 24/7 is necessary.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes there's this pipe dream or this vision that we should be all multitasking and doing all kinds of things simultaneously. And I know when I'm trying to juggle too many things at once, I'm not doing anything brilliantly, and certainly I'm never going to write or record or create whatever the best kind of stuff that I'm capable of whilst my son plays trains by my feet. My brain just won't work in that capacity. And I think having those conversations is so key with our partner or our family around us, our network of sort of saying what you need, because I think there's that feeling of like, well, I should just be a superwoman and this is what it is, but actually people can help you and can ease it for you, but you need to say what you need in that circumstance.
Yeah, and it's hard to ask for help. I still find that hard to do sometimes, and admitting to yourself that you can't do it all, and that you have to be honest about your deadlines and so on, and also this is part of the conversation around raising films, that it's not a failure to say actually you do need to allow for a different kind of deadline because I have a child, or I have caring responsibilities, because it might be that you have to care for an elderly relative or similar, and actually it's not a failure to say, can we not have a meeting at 6:30, or can the deadline be this, or but it's a process.
It really is. I got an email today actually from somebody saying, and it was quite a vague one of like, hi, I'm in London next week, are you ? And it sort of wasn't clear of what that person wanted to do or what they needed, and I very quickly almost said, these are the days that I'm available. But then I sort of thought, if that's something that I can do over the phone or via Skype, or if it's not that urgent and I can do it another time because I've got a particularly chocker week next week, then I'm going to ask the question. And I would never have done that before. I think I always had that sense of it's an opportunity, or it would be nice. And I'm way more strategic and firm with my time, for sure.
Yeah, it's learning to say no, isn't it? Some people are very good at it, and I don't think I've ever been, because I sort of get excited about lots of different projects, and then now it's sort of realizing actually I can't afford it anymore because childcare is expensive and there's a lot of other expenses, and so that life, and that can feel frustrating, that you want to say yes to lots of exciting things, but actually if they're not paid, often it takes a while before things are funded, or the projects that won't ever get funded because of the nature of them or whatever, that you can't do that, and you have to be mindful of your time.
Otherwise you end up just having conversations of, it sounds amazing, but yet no money has been exchanged, or you're sort of no further on, really. It's you need sort of that agenda, and then it all becomes a bit corporate and weird. But, you know, you sort of want to make the best use of your time, I guess, because any time that you're sort of wasting, you're taking it away from your family or from yourself, like having 5 minutes to read a book. And so how did Raising Films begin? How was that idea conceived?
So Raising Films started in 2015, and it really started, the initial first conversation was between Nicky and Hope. So Nicky Bentham and Hope Dixon-Leach, they I think met at a festival or something, or they were the only two people who turned up to something, sort of social event at a festival, and you know, and they were both parents, and they started talking. The rest of us, it was an email conversation for a while, and there were a couple of others in that conversation, the conversation about Raising Films, and they reached out to people that they thought were interested in this conversation about, you know, the barriers that having caring responsibilities create in the film and TV industries. So
People don't know the limitations of film and TV industries. Would you mind just sharing sort of some of the things that pop up that maybe people who are just sort of seeing the final product on the telly might not have considered?
Well, I mean, there are many different types of barriers. So, for people who work on set, so crew, and, you know, and directors and producers, anybody who works in production, having a child where you have very long working days, sometimes have to go away, having caring responsibilities can obviously be a hindrance, because there will, or has not been up until now, any provision made for that to be covered for, you know, and there've been no crashes on set or anything like that might allow people to bring small, you know, babies and toddlers along, and that obviously means something. It's often women who that will bear the brunt of that, and if they don't find a way to cope, or have, you know, somebody who can travel along with them at, you know, at their own cost, then maybe it means they drop out for a couple of years, and then that's when we begin to send it. It's hard to come back in once you've been away for 2-3 years or longer.
Yes.
It becomes really hard to re-enter the industry, and then that affects the figures that we are seeing everywhere. From, you know, there's the Reason Calling the Shots survey that was released last year and has been debated again in Cannes just now, and also the Writers Guild is about to release a big research report on the representation of female writers in the film and TV industries, and those numbers will also be as shocking as you might expect. So it all plays a part. And obviously for writers, we don't necessarily have to be on set, but it's costly to have a child, and if people don't budget for it, or there's a lot of expectations that, you know, in the early stages of the project you're working for free, and nobody can afford to do that really. No. But even less so when you have a child. And actually I found it a bit shocking but also interesting that since I've had my daughter, I have been able to say to people more than I could before, or if I said it before, it wasn't, you know, people didn't really hear it, to say, you know what, I can't work for nothing in this phase because I can't afford it. And they'd go, yes, of course, you know, because childcare and stuff. And that, you know, and I was talking to a female director friend about it, and she doesn't have children. And she was saying, well, that's appalling because obviously she can't afford it either. Mm-hmm. It's just that, but she can't say, I have a child and I have to pay for childcare. But it shouldn't be the case that people only understand that you can't work for free because you have a child.
Yes.
It should just be, it should just be a given that you know, unless you have an enormous trust fund, then, you know, you can't afford it.
Yeah. I remember being an actor in the early stages of sort of starting out, and the amount of work that I did for free, or I'd get so excited if they were going to give you a taxi home, and actually then you're going, but I've got no food in my fridge, or that's sort of the starving artist. And I think one thing that actually being a creative sort of now as a parent has given me is that real sort of entrepreneurial spirit of like, let's not just wait for permission for somebody at the top to say, do you know what, let's shake up the whole industry. That actually, if you see a gap or something that needs attention, then you sort of have to do it yourself, because unless you're in it, it's not obvious to anybody else.
No, but I mean, it is sometimes, you would think that it was. You would think it's obvious why, in terms of female representation in the arts, it's not just about childcare or about people who are parents or carers. That there are other systemic reasons for those figures, and it also affects, obviously, representation in terms of ethnic minorities and so on. So, because it comes back to money, I think it's a fallacy when people think that starving somehow fuels creativity. Like, actually it doesn't. It just means you can't focus on anything.
Oh, I'm terrible when I haven't had lunch. That is not when you're going to get my best work from me.
Oh, all you can think about, can I pay the rent next month? So, I think that's, but people are starting to confront that fallacy, I think. But it is something that we constantly have to challenge, I think. And sometimes there are lots of, that what we found with Raising Films as well is that, you begin to challenge, the smaller details where you go, like, we talked about earlier, sort of having a meeting at 6:30 or, requesting for things to happen right at, bedtime or things like that. And sometimes people don't even think about it. Or changing meeting plans like a day before when you've kind of arranged for childcare and so on, as I've had happen sometimes when it's been, people don't think about it and they're like, oh, actually, you know what, I can't do it, and can we just do it in 2 days' time? You're like, but I've booked childcare now. I might be able to.
It's those sort of logistic things of waiting, and I think actually it's made me a better creative, because now when I go an audition, I'm sort of not clock watching as in come on, get on with it, but I'm not sort of I don't have that energy of like, I could just sit here all day and do whatever you want, because I'm like, nope, got to go and pick my kid up from nursery, I've got dinner and bath and all of that sort of stuff to do.
Yeah.
And how did you get it off the ground, and how did it sort of, the idea of going, actually we need to get this out there and we need to start campaigning and talking about it, how did you start to bring it to life?
Well, we initially we ran a crowdfunder that where we raised relatively, well, a big sum, but a relatively small sum of money in the grand scheme of things to hire a project manager who could help us, and that was really the beginning of it, and also was an indicator of, in terms of how people responded to it, that there were a lot of people who really wanted this conversation to begin, I think. So that was how we started, and then with that money, we hired Laura Giles, who's our project manager, and she came on board, and then from there on, we started to talk about, the real work, as it were, which is ongoing and which is about changing how the industry works. And, there's a lot to do, changing legislation, thinking about, budget lines and so on. But also we have, as you know, we're constantly gathering material for the website. So that's also a resource for people, and creating an online life and resource that people can use. And
I still feel like it is, I mean, I've been in the industry for so long, but I feel like there are so many parts of it that are still not really regulated, that there isn't necessarily, it's all a bit hearsay, or some dude said to me at drama school 17 years ago, this was the way. But, you know, when I was at drama school, we didn't really have the internet. So, like, things have changed so much. So it has to be made current for people so they can work with the times.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. There are lots of things that you think would have changed because, you know, some of these conversations we've been having for years, and you just sort of think, well, 15 years later, it ought to have changed. But I think there is a sense now that things need to change, and maybe in a more forceful way in terms of quotas or things like that have been dirty words that people haven't wanted to use those words up until now. But there's maybe a sense now that actually 2018 and things don't quite stack up still, and so something else needs to happen in order to change it.
Completely. Yeah, I spoke in a few episodes before to the actor Indra Ove, and I met her in my second job out of drama school, and she had two very small boys at the time, but were sort of, you know, they popped to rehearsals for a bit and she was looking after them, and then she did the rehearsal and her partner was sort of on board. And as somebody who knew, like, I wanted to always have children, I'm so glad that I saw that quite early in my career, because, and she knows this, I've told her that she was quite a pivotal person because she was showing me that it was actually possible, whereas before maybe it had been sold that you had to choose. You were either a mother who had given up her dream and was baking cakes at home, or you were someone who was enjoying their dream but went home to an empty bed.
I think also, I mean, I think there is this sort of, you know, obviously the expression, the pram in the hall is the death of all good art, but and that's terrible, you know. But obviously it is about what you see and challenging the perception of what it means to be a creative person or an artist or you know, or anybody kind of a working career person, if you like, but that it's possible to combine both lives. And I think that was what a lot of the testimonials on the website are about as well, is to get people to be open about, and people have been and are incredibly open about the challenges they've faced and how they've overcome it or how they're trying to overcome them. And I think that's great to read, because there is this perception that, you know, you sort of I mean, I hid my pregnancy, like, in the industry, because I didn't want people to think that I wouldn't be available. And I know lots of people who did that, and that's something that ought to change. Really,
and this is recent. This is not like the 1950s, you know. No. Wow.
And a lot, you know, and I know a lot of people who did and do that because they don't want to be seen to be you know, like you said, that they're just going to become a mom or a parent. I don't think guys need to hide that their partners are pregnant, but because it's not expected of them in the same way that it will affect their career, and it shouldn't for women either. I think it is changing now. I think women are going, actually, you know what, I am pregnant, but I can still do my job, and I will do my job afterwards. And, you know, and should, you know, if people decide to change their career or to become stay-at-home parents, that's fine as well. But it should be your choice to make, not one that society imposes on you.
Completely. And everything in my life, I would say, has improved since becoming a mum, apart from sleep, which is still seriously lacking. But everything, my relationships, my my purpose in life, the way that I see the world and question it. And I would say my sort of lust for life has really increased as well, because you look back on those sort of weekends where you'd go out on a Friday night, so Saturday becomes a bit of a day in bed of having a hangover, and then you're like, oh, it's 5 o'clock, so let's go out again, and all of that. And since having a child, I'm much more in the world, and because he's 2.5 and we're discussing everything at the moment, then you really open your eyes to it, and it's really fueled my creativity.
It is interesting because obviously they do demand an attention to the present,
yes.
which is an interesting process, and they're just like calling it as they see it, and that can be challenging but also quite refreshing, I think.
Yes.
But I think also something that I think I've also I've maybe always been sort of socially interested in the world, and what our role, or how can I put it, our place in the world. But I think having a child has turned me into more of an activist. And now that I have possibly less time than I've ever had before, that's possibly the most ridiculous time to become involved in anything like that. But you also sort of suddenly feel a newfound sense of responsibility, I think.
Yeah, and the world, and the TV and film industry is, I don't know what the number one hobby is, but certainly watching box sets on the sofa at night is probably way more popular than line dancing or something. And yet it's one of the industries that is less regulated and also sort of very old school. It does need lots of shakes up, and I think people will be quite shocked if they knew that was the case. And I think that sense of feeling protected as a career person, as a creative person rather, that we were sort of taught as actors to sort of go we were taught, it was all a drama school, it was all about the art and your character and motivation and what you felt, but actually as soon as you get on set you're like, oh, I'm the least insignificant person here, there's so many other people who know what they're doing, and you just have to do the work and get on with it. But that sort of suits me because I like looking and seeing really learning the creative process. But I think certainly when you're first starting out, you're not really given those tools of how to be empowered and how to ask like, am I getting paid for this? And I think it's such a brilliant conversation to continue.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously one of the big problems. This isn't just for raising films, but for anybody who's, working in the change movements now, and, Time's Up and everything, that in our industries, because a lot of people are freelance, that's one of the big problems in terms of changing things, because it is so unregulated, as you say, and it's really hard for people, even if they report something, who do they report to? So, there's not often a clear line of reporting. They can report to their union. If they're union members, they should be, but sometimes they're not, and there's no HR department, and sometimes the unions can't do anything because that person has moved on. But it does start with calling it out, but it can be hard. And if you're new and you don't have a position in the industry, it can be hard to say, I'm being mistreated here, I'm not being paid, I should have been paid, I've been unfairly discriminated against. Sometimes that's hard to prove. But all of that plays a part in terms of what we see on screen, which is it's I think one of the early conversations we had, with Raising Films and with some of our ambassadors is also, like, why is this important? Because it's just the creative industries, and actually aren't we all so lucky that we're working in it? But actually it does matter, because it matters who gets to tell the stories that we see on screen.
Yes.
And because storytelling matters. So I think those were significant arguments for why the industry needs to change, because it does then reflect back.
Completely. And just that sense of, you know, when I think back to British TV, like something like Grange Hill, which was a school drama, that was so, I mean, you know, there were kids in my school that were like, well, I'm not allowed to watch Grange Hill, you know, it's banned him. Or even Brookside, that was, even though it was a soap opera, I missed that programme, I loved it so much, but it shared drama in a way that we hadn't seen before. And when I look back to sort of early programmes like that really inspired how, you know, the characters that I wanted to play, or the conversations that I wanted to experience as an actor in that dialogue, I think, gosh, you know, somebody actually wrote those things, and thank goodness they were at that table at that time. But sometimes it may not be the case, and I think you do see it sometimes in patterns of going, blimey, I think we've heard this story before. Yeah. I mean, because it takes a long time for things to change, but it does matter who's telling the stories, you know. So when the conversations in, you know, recent times have been about, you know, it's getting really hard for working class actors to get a look in, that matters. That's, you know, that's worrying. Or if working class writers, if, you know, classes become you know, harder to define, but it does matter who tell the stories that we get to see. Yeah, I remember at drama school actually being told by an acting teacher that she didn't believe me. She didn't believe the character that I was portraying, because she said, oh, people don't exist like that. And I said, well, you only have to kind of like move out of London to kind of see that is the case. And, you know, it was a respectful character and all of that. And then she saw Jade Goody on Big Brother, who was at the time quite confrontational and quite sort of out there in terms of her personality, and she came over and apologised and said, oh, actually my eyes have been opened and I got sucked into just seeing one type of person, and I forgot that people of all walks and of life are out there. And and I thought, oh my goodness, and this is an acting teacher, this is a bit of a worry.
Yeah, that is.
She should be the most open-minded of them all, but
I know.
But yeah,
I mean, and that's, you know, it matters, you know, who teaches. It matters who creates our stories, and and who makes the decisions about who creates our stories.
And where would you like to see Raising Films in like 5 years' time? Where would you like it to go?
You know, you probably get maybe a slightly different answer from all of the 5 founders, but I think, I mean, the joke is that we would like to not need to exist, or at least I think that would be the dream. I somehow don't think that that we will achieve that in 5 years' time. But ideally, you know, we would like for the industry to work in a way that Raising Films no longer need to be there, or maybe has morphed into something else that that is more of a community space. But I think that'll take longer. But that would be the ideal, that actually we have created an industry that is encompassing for the for parents and carers.
Yes.
But I, you know, our conversation up until now has been very focused on parents, and we haven't even started on carers because I think they have an even harder time. So, because then it's somehow not really recognised, I think, how hard that is, and so that's a whole other conversation that really needs focus as well.
Yes, yeah, I agree. I would love it in 5 years' time, where people sort of go, oh, "Gosh, was that a thing? Or did that used to be?" You know, with kids these days, like there was a time when you didn't have phones. What do you mean?
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it's a bit like, you know, there was a time when women didn't have a vote, but as we can see, you know, that these things come around again. You know, yes. So even though thankfully, you know, women now have the vote, and there are other things that didn't exist 100 years ago and now do, but there are still things that we're kind of battling. Actually, we don't have equal pay, and there's a lot of other things that I think maybe people have thought were not an issue, and are still an issue. So it doesn't take that long, and so it doesn't go away that quickly, I think. But yeah, the goal, I think, is to do ourselves out of existence.
Yes. And you realise actually with one of those things that there suddenly starts to have a momentum of like, oh, okay, what else do we need to talk about? And, the sort of when people are talking about online presence, suddenly then mental health conversations have popped up, and it moves, there's sort of a wave that people catch, which is brilliant. If people want to come and find out more or get some information, where should they go?
Well, they should go to our website, www.raisingfilms.com, and we also have a Facebook page, and we're on Twitter, and those are good places to start. And they can find their contact details on the website.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. What a great chat. And I know that lots of people will have fire in their belly afterwards. And, I think it's suddenly when you look back on those situations, you might go, gosh, actually, I should have handled that in a different way. Or next time that occurs, I'm going to do something about it. So thank you so much for sharing all your words of wisdom today.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would love to hear what you thought of the episode and share any takeaways with me. Come and find me across social media at Nicky Raby, or you can visit the podcast page, nickyraby.com/podcast.